I have to tell you that I was terribly nervous about doing this event because I can't talk off the cuff. I have to have notes. And I had visions of myself appearing draped in silver lame and really just doing Marlene Dietrich and singing Falling in Love Again, or maybe showing you a little bit of Bergman and Bogart doing a scene from Casablanca, and then the song comes on. You must remember this: a kiss is just a kiss, a sigh is just a sigh. The fundamental things apply. So, I can't sing. I've got a cough. Coughing Cupid is not good. And even without the cough, I couldn't sing any of that. So I have to talk. And, you know, one of the brilliant things about music and lyric is that they can be intimate in public. Words can't be intimate in quite the same way, and love is a very intimate subject. The other thing about music is that it wraps emotion into itself and plays on the body, as you've just heard and felt. And I'm stuck with language, which is, in a sense, a poor relation here, even though I did try in the book somehow to make it work in a way that could tell you something about love. Love, love, love. Ah, yeah, there it is. And I've subtitled the book Anatomy of an Unruly Emotion. That was originally the main title because, in fact, it is an anatomy as much as it is a history. It's a way of trying to understand some of the underlying dynamics of this very unruly, unpredictable emotion, which is full of contradictions. Okay, so I'm not Marlene Dietrich. What am I going to talk about? I think I should tell you a little bit about why I ended up writing this book. It all began in the way that these throwaway things happen at the publishing party for my last book, Mad, Bad and Sad, which Rosie mentioned. And my publisher said, "What do you want to do next, Lisa?" And I said, "Well, what is there? What about a book about love?" And she said, "Yes, yes, yes, yes." And I went home and I thought, this is completely crazy. What am I doing writing about love? It's an impossible subject. But it made some kind of sense to me because in Mad, Bad and Sad, I had really traced the way in which the mind-doctoring professions, alienism, psychiatry, neurology, psychoanalysis, the talking therapies, had taken over so very much of our lives that, in fact, any kind of excess had now become a diagnostic classification in that book that you heard about earlier, the DSM, which left us very, very little room for anything which might be unruly, which might be excessive, except love. Love is the last socially sanctioned place where we're actually allowed to be mad. And so it seemed right to try and unpick this emotion. So why is love mad? Well, you see, Shakespeare, the lunatic, the lover, and the poet are of imagination all compact. And it's quite true that the experience of love, certainly the experience of passion, shares a great deal with all those excesses that we think of as madness. When we're in love, we have no sense of responsibility. We have very little sense of society. We are out of control. We're unpredictable. We're totally focused on the one we love, or we're sheathed, in a sense protected, omnipotent through the desire of another, which drapes us in this cloak of huge power. We're also at the same time, simultaneously, incredibly vulnerable, permeable, and we move between sort of ecstasy and bliss and total despair. These are kind of characteristics that are all over the DSM, and it's quite strange that the neurologists, although I think they're coming up with one, and the psychiatrists haven't yet come up with a drug to get rid of it for us, so that we can live on this plateau of so-called sanity. In any case, love is a form of madness. Slide. And there's a picture of Cupid, and I've put above him a quotation from Voltaire, which says, love is a canvas furnished by nature and embroidered by imagination. Well, the nature is, of course, our bodies, and the embroidery is everything else that we put on it. And Cupid, quite often, as you know, wears a blindfold. He does this because love is blind. We project onto the other all kinds of things, which may or may not be there. But Cupid is also a toddler, a babe. And some people have said, and I've culled a great deal of material on this from all kinds of spheres, literary, psychoanalytical, historical, and so on. Montaigne as well comes in importantly in the book. Some people have said that the reason Cupid is the, if you like, the emblem, the icon of passionate, mad, crazy love, is that, like a small child, he predates language, language being the moment when the I is constituted, the self is constituted, and reason comes into play. Well, he's prior to reason, and in some ways emblematic of that in other pictures of him, this wonderful state where mother and child are one, where the outside and the inside blend. When we're in love, we talk about blending with the other. We talk about twinning. I've just put this in because it's one of my very, very favorite cartoons. And I think it captures everything there is really to say about falling in love. And for those of you who can't see, it's two snails and, of course, a tape dispenser. And one snail says to the other, I don't care if she is a tape dispenser, I love her. Which, of course, is something we all recognize about love. So, from the outside, of course, it's very, very funny, but from the insides, it can feel rather overwhelming and tragic, because we are, in fact, crazy. We're oblivious to the world, and we don't know how to be reasonable in that state. It's also perhaps because we are slightly crazy, and because the experience of love is so total, that it's always shadowed by its kind of nether twins, hate and jealousy. And of course, I deal with all that nether side in the book as well, because it is key to the experience as a whole. Now, I've managed to talk for a few minutes, and I haven't yet mentioned the word sex. And I think it's because I'm rather shy about talking about sex in public. And there's so much of it in the public sphere at the moment, what with DSK and all our footballers and all of cyberspace being replete with it, that it's actually become, I think, one of our most public aspects of love, rather than, in a sense, being the most intimate, which is where it started out. And one of the things I explore in the book, really partly stems from Freud, but not only, is the way in which it seems to me that when Freud was writing, and he talked about, the superego, if you like, the conscience coming in and repressing sexuality. What's happened in its stead now is that our superego, our conscience, has really become all about getting more and more sexuality and being more and more immersed in sex, so that we feel anxiety because, or feel guilt sometimes too, but mostly anxiety, because we don't think we're getting enough or of the right kind. And so that sex has taken on a very different place, I think, in our public and cultural sphere than it used to have when we thought of sex as being the repressed element of life. Anyhow, that's something I talk about because it's rather important in the contemporary moment. In this moment of great abundance and excessiveness, that what we really think about most is that we want the next thing or the next person, or a lot of people feel that this is what they lack if they don't have the next thing and the next person. And this constitutes a whole other way of being alive to sexuality, which needs looking at. Anyhow, I did wrestle with all this subject of love and sex in the book, and from Aristotle to agony aunts. I ended up with really what is in part, for a lot of the book, an exploration of what I began to think of as ordinary love. Not only the heights and raptures of passion, but the kind of love that follows us through life. Because it seems to me that it is really all these aspects of ordinary love which bind us to one another and bind us into a social group. So that's where I ended up focusing for, well, a good 2/3 of the book. It seemed to me that I was ready to do this. I would have written a very, very different book when I was 25 about love, because of course, you know, love also does change through time, and you learn different kinds of things about yourself and about others. And now that I've been through, I think, many of the variations and permutations, I think maybe I kind of feel slightly ready to talk about this subject. And when I was thinking about why I had so many varieties of different ways of thinking about love, I realized that it was because I'd actually been brought up between cultures. I was brought up in Quebec, which is a French-speaking part of the world, but it's part of a larger English whole. And I was brought up really with two languages and two literatures, and two, if you like, religious conventions. Well, three really, because my parents were Jewish. So I had this very strange world where on the one hand, the Catholic Church was there with all its wonderful, very tangible, physical relationship to the sensuous world, which was also really something which was sin. And so I grew up with a sense of sin and a sense of transgression and the forbidden, which is terribly important in love. But also of love as salvation, as ecstasy. And that elaborated itself both in popular culture and in literary tradition. On the English side, of course, there was guilt and the other kind of prohibition, but very Puritan, don't touch the physical. And the third aspect of that was this kind of Jewish world weariness and pessimism and humor about love as well as everything else. In the literatures, it seemed to me that you know, I grew up with on the one hand, English language literature, the English novel, and the template of love there is, you know, girl meets boy, pitfalls, misunderstandings, and eventually this huge happy end in the promise or the actuality of marriage. In the French template, in the continental literature, that was very, very different. Because marriage was always a backdrop of convenience or misery, and passion was you know, transgression. It was adultery, and all the goods and indeed all the tragedies of life came out of that form of transgression. And so somehow I had to make sense of these different kinds of traditions, because the traditions are important. They're the elaborations of love, if you like, but also there is that constant through cultures, which is that people, you know, from the remains on Egyptian papyri to the present, there is a real sense that love is something which is obsessive. And 2 minutes left. You mean I've talked that long? I haven't even got to marriage. Roll on, forget about history and tradition. Okay, so very quickly, love is a real thing, marriage an ideal thing. A fusion of the real with the ideal never goes unpunished. And in the book, I explore the, if you like, the vicissitudes of marriage, upon which we've put so many of our huge hopes in love. And of course, dissatisfactions ensue. And I try and explore a little of what these dissatisfactions are about, and really think about how we can make the familiar a site of excitement. And of course, children come along. Quickly, children. Oh no, adultery came first. Forget about adultery. And there's a lot about love in the family, which is where we actually learn how to love through life. All the patterns are laid down there, and we vary them later on. And of course, we have a great many theories now about what it means to love your child and how to bring them up. And I thought this was a very apt way of telling you quickly that actually just enjoy them. And finally, if there is a finally, yes, the last section of the book is really about friendship, because I think it's one of the forms of love which used to be much talked about in Montaigne, the Greeks, of course, and now we tend to think of it as cyberspace. Well, it's more than cyberspace and more important than that. And finally, since I know my time is really up, could I just have my coda? Next slide. That's all I really needed to say through the whole book, and perhaps to sing it as well. But you know that in books you can't quote from lyrics because it's just too expensive. So I thought I would just put it up here for now. Thank you.